Our next speaker this afternoon is Dave Van Wylen, who is the Dean for Natural and Applied Science at Hope College. Dave arrived at Hope College in 2015 after 21 years on faculty and administration at St. Olaf College. A physiologist by training, Dave developed an interest in water when he led a group of students to the Middle East during a study abroad semester. Dave will be discussing with us the myriad of international, domestic, and local problems created by humanity's relationship with water. Please join me in welcoming Dave.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to my cousin, Rick Van Dellen. It's nice to have cousins in high places. Is this going to get going? There we go. So I'm going to use these 5 words as a way to describe global issues, for the most part, related to water. So let's just dive in with the first. Water is precious. And let me just make a comment here. If you see a person's name down at the bottom of a photo, when I've traveled with students to the Middle East or Australia or other places, oftentimes have them do a photo project while I'm teaching a course in water, where they just take pictures of how they see water in use. So many of these photos are from students. Okay, let's start. Water is precious. Maybe the most obvious, all of biological life takes place in water. That's nothing new, but that's the underlying reason why we have so much concern in water. Community life revolves around water. Grand Rapids, after all, is on water. Where I live, Holland, Michigan, is on water. Raise your hand if your community you grew up in is on a river, a lake, or ocean. We build communities on water, and then we build central community features with water. Recreational life thrives on water. In Michigan, we're somewhat partial to the solid form of water this time of year. Commercial life depends on water. Whether it's this tannery in Morocco, making computer chips, so much of industry depends on water. Spiritual life incorporates water. This man cleansing himself outside a mosque in Istanbul. Water is often used as a spiritual metaphor. Maybe you know this passage from the New Testament where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well. He says, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. He's talking metaphor. She hears this. Anyone know how she responds?
She says, give me this water so I don't have to.
She thinks it's a good deal, right? She's thinking, not metaphorically, but that she would never have to get thirsty again if she claimed this water. Fresh water is especially precious. So this is 100 dots representing all the Earth's water. About 97% of these dots, or 97% of the Earth's water, is salt water, not in a usable form for us as drinking water. Of the remaining 3% or so that's fresh water, the majority of that, or 2% of the total, is stored in ice caps. That too is unavailable. So really what we're talking about, all in all, is about 1% of the Earth's water. Therefore, it's not surprising. This phrase from the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. So indeed, water is precious. It's so precious, in fact, that oftentimes we just sort of take it for granted. We're not the first that took water for granted. Many of you would recognize this line. This line is the very first line from Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Now, when I grew up, I was sort of had this image taught to me that there was nothing and somehow God created everything out of nothing. Well, I mean, I read this very metaphorically, but actually, if you read it, it wasn't like God created everything out of nothing, because the next line says, Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Interesting metaphor if you think about it. How did the world come about? God and water, and everything else came to be. All right, water is precarious. There's no doubt that we have put water in a precarious state in the world. I'm going to do a lot of numbers today, but world population around 7.6 billion. Current estimates would say about 884 million of those lack access to clean drinking water. It's about 1 in 9 people. I don't know, maybe we have around 18 tables in here. It'd be like 2 tables here lack access to clean water. Everyone else does, but 2 tables don't. Access has a formal definition. In this way of thinking, access is within a kilometer, a 10 to 15 minute walk. Anything less than that is considered having access. And many people walk more than a kilometer. Closely related to this, 2.3 billion people lack basic sanitation. That also causes lots of water-related problems. So water is clearly a precarious state. Let's do a little fun and games with maps. This is from a nice website, worldmapper.org. It does an interesting things with maps. So this is the way we typically look at maps of the world, where the size of the country is based according to the land area. What worldmapper.org does is it changes orientation. So let's just show you what this would look like. So what would the map look like if countries are sized according to their population, not according to their land mass? What's going to get really big? China, India. What countries will get small, meaning that they have relatively low density? Australia? Okay. So you get how that works? India, there's Australia, US. Canada got small, relatively speaking. Okay? So you get how this works, right? Okay. What will the map look like if countries are sized according to the proportion of people without reliable access to safe water? Okay?
What are we calling safe?
Safe means you don't get sick from drinking the water, basically. Okay? Sub-Saharan Africa. Australia goes away. US goes away. India. Who walks to collect the water in Sub-Saharan Africa typically? Women? Children? How about boys versus girls? Girls more than boys. Okay? So this shows the distribution of women versus men, girls versus boys. This is probably about a 5-gallon jug of water. Anyone know how much water weighs per gallon?
8 pounds.
There you go, 8 pounds. So that's like over 40 pounds. When I give this talk to college students, I bring a 5-gallon bucket and put it on their head. I don't know about you, but honestly, I'd be hard-pressed to walk from here to that wall with a 5-gallon bucket on my head. And yet people are carrying it miles and miles. It's not good for their health. And if these kids are carrying water during the day, what are they not doing? They're not going to school. All right, back to our population map. Let's flip it. What will the map look like if countries are sized according to the proportion of the worldwide water use? Okay, there we are. Sub-Saharan Africa really disappears for the most part. So basically, we in the United States, we're number 1. We use about 575 liters per person per day for drinking, cleaning, basic household uses. Sub-Saharan African averages about 50 liters, about a 10-fold different. World Health Organization says minimum of 20 liters per person per day, a little over 5 gallons a day, for your most basic drinking and personal hygiene. When you add things like bathing and laundry, it gets up to a minimum of 50 liters per person per day. So much of the world here is living at or below water poverty, while we live 10 times above the minimum level. Anyone want to guess how much water we use just to flush our toilets every day? Of course, it depends on the kind of toilets you have, but somewhere around 70 liters per person per day. This is another way of looking at the map of the world, color-coded based on areas that have little to no water scarcity. If you have physical water scarcity or approaching physical water scarcity, that's in these colors, that means that there's just lack of rainfall. But there's a lot of areas that don't lack rainfall, but they lack infrastructure to deliver water. So you can see, basically looking at these three colors here, what fraction of the world has some form of water scarcity, including some parts of our own country. All of these things could be subjects of additional talks. All of these are making it worse. In fact, at a conference just last year, this was one of the quotes from one of the speakers. Water is the hammer with which climate change will hit the earth. So by some estimates, by 2025, 2/3 of the world population could be under some form of water stress conditions. So water is indeed in a precarious state. If you want to read one book that's maybe an interesting, sort of easy read book on water, read The Big Thirst by Charles Fishman. Very interesting book. He's talking about Americans, by the way, when he has this quote, when he says the three things we've taken to be the natural state of water supply: abundant, cheap, and safe. That threesome, that's not going to be present in the coming decades. Not all three of those together. It might be abundant, it might be safe, it may no longer be cheap. Okay, water is problematic. It's problematic because we can't always control where it is when we want it. Flooding is problematic. We get reminded of that often these days. This is Houston last summer. Droughts are problematic. Let me see if I can just get you to this one graphic showing what's happening in Cape Town now. You've probably been reading about this, haven't you? All right. So this is an interesting graphic. So this is the main reservoir supplying Cape Town. That is what it was like 2011. That's what it's like now. Oh, it's not there. Oh, sorry. If you could see that. What you would see is basically a reservoir that's about 15% full. They're saying in Cape Town that they're going to run out of water, so you're not going to have water running out of the taps in April or May. The first major city that is sitting there looking like it's going to run out of municipal water. And then what are they going to do? Right? Tainted municipal water is problematic. We learned that here in the state of Michigan. Water-related diseases are problematic. About 5,000 children die each day as a result of diseases caused by unclean water, poor sanitation. Here's a list of some of those diseases. That's about a kid every 20 seconds. Or when I talk about this on a campus like Hope College, I say basically almost think about it as if the entire Hope College community died one day, and the next day they're replaced by another 3,000 some students and 700, 800 employees, and they all died the next day. And every day it was replaced, and every day that many people died. Transboundary rivers can be highly problematic. This is the Nile River as it flows through Cairo. This is a map of the area in Egypt, where the shown here in this shaded area, this is the Nile River Basin. 10 countries touch on the Nile River Basin. The Nile River flows from south up north and drains into the Mediterranean as it passes through Egypt. Let me just show you Egypt in a little bit more detail. That's a picture of Egypt from above. 95% of the Egyptians live along the Nile River. Egypt was mostly desert and the Nile River. Many people would say that Egypt is one of the most powerful nations of those 10 countries that have something to do with the Nile River. We've all been at a dinner table where there's a large crowd and a certain amount of food that starts passing around. And if you're sitting there at the end and something is appealing to you, what are you hoping? That it's not gone by the time it gets to you. And this is a part of the world where everyone sitting before you is getting more and more hungry. The appetite is going up. The need for water is going up. There's only a fixed amount of water in the Nile River. Do you think there's potential contention that can arise in how to share that resource amongst those 10 countries? You better believe it. I just put this in because I like it. It's a cool picture of Egypt at night. Another river basin. Anyone recognize this river basin? All right, now you probably do. So just talk briefly about the Jordan River Basin. So get a little oriented to the maps here. Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, the Jordan River, as it runs between those two bodies of water. Actually, the upper Jordan is here. So here's the boundary of Israel. There's the West Bank boundary. Jordan's over here, Syria, Lebanon. So let's look a little bit at some of the issues facing the Jordan River Basin. So 1967, Six-Day War, Israel takes the Golan Heights and the West Bank. The West Bank, you could sort of say, well, that's central to the country. But what was so interesting about the Golan Heights? Well, here's a map of just that area. Here's the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Tiberias. Here's the border between Israel and Lebanon. This was Syria territory, Golan Heights. Why did they want that so badly? Well, here's another view of that same area to maybe get a little sense of why this was important. Because remember, Israel already controls this, controlling the water that's flowing into the Sea of Galilee. If they control this as well, what do they control? They control water. Okay? So, once Israel took control of the Sea of Galilee, now you can start to divert and dam up and control the water. 100% of the waters, the dams and diversions that they did, we reduced the flow to about 10% of the natural flow. The Jordan River now is sort of more or less a heavily polluted drainage ditch. This is what the Jordan River looks like today. Just for a frame of reference, this story from the Hebrew Bible talks about people who were camping along the Jordan, priests carrying the Ark of Covenant. Jordan was at flood stage. Priests reached the Jordan, touched the water's edge, and basically the story goes, the streams separated, the water separated, pile up in a great heap, stopped upstream, downstream at the town called Adam. While this water's flowing down the Dead Sea, everything was cut off, and you could cross over the Jordan River. Does that seem compatible with what you see here? You know, you could almost just throw a 2x12 across and walk across the Jordan River now. Israel's engineers, magnificent. One of the things they did once they controlled the Sea of Galilee was they created this pipeline. You see it coming off here and coming down to the southern Israel. 100 miles, it's called the Israel National Water Carrier. About 100 miles of pipes, canals, tunnels, all carrying and pumping water from the Sea of Galilee to over here in western southern Israel. This is another map of the same area just to highlight this water carrier. Phenomenal engineering. This is what it looks like from above as this snakes through the Israeli countryside, diverting massive amounts of water. This is that same map Here's the West Bank boundary, Palestinian territory. This is what it looks like from above. What do you notice? What's green and what's not green? So Israel takes the water, pumps it down here, used to grow crops. Jordan River, which runs right through the West Bank, Jordan on this side, West Bank on this side, largely diverted. This is why you see some graphics like this that looks at how much water per household Palestinians have per person versus this year's Israelis. We don't have time to go through all this graphic, but you can kind of see when it comes time to distributing underground aquifers, how much goes to Israel, how much goes to the Palestinians, how you deal with the Jordan River. Do you think that's a source of contention amongst people who already have some underlying conflict? But now there's a distribution difference of water. So this is a map of the major river basins of the world. And the only point of this is to show you that the river basins are not really drawn according to where the boundaries of the countries are. So by some estimates, about 260 river basins are shared by 2 or more countries. If water is going to become more of a stressor, this is just going to become more and more of a challenge, how to figure this out. So water is indeed problematic. At the turn of the century, U.S. Secretary General Boutros Ghali at the time said water will be more important than oil this century. There's already talks of more and more water wars. There's good examples of them. Just now, our own Supreme Court's going to hear a grievance between 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, about their fighting over water, not to mention what's happening in different parts of the world. This was an interesting article, editorial by Thomas Friedman back in 2013. He's talking about Syria, basically the issues that underlay some of the tension in Syria. You can make a case that a lot of it had to do with the way the government handled water. It's still an issue. All right, perplexing aspects of water. We do some really interesting things with water. We build cities and golf courses in the desert, and then we have to get water heroically many examples. We have to get water to these cities. We flush toilets and we water our lawns with purified drinking water. If you have a bottled water bottle in front of you, this would be the time to slip it under the table or put it in front of your neighbor, because this is going to be my little rant. It's like, okay, it's my rant, so just be prepared. I find bottled water to be extraordinarily perplexing. How did we get to this point? Americans spend lots and lots of money per year on bottled water. We ship bottled water all over the country. And we are willing to drink it at a cost of 100 to 1,000 times more than accessible, safe, reliable, highly monitored tap water. And there's a little asterisk there, because I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Okay? How many of us would see 2 pairs of jeans side by side that are basically the same? One that costs $30 and one that costs $3,000 or $30,000, and would say, hey, I'll take that $30,000 pair of jeans. That seems good to me. But somehow we've become convinced that this is the thing to do. Pay that much more for a product that is not very helpful to the environment. Oops. How do we get there? This is an industry that largely did not exist in the 1980s and earlier. And what happened was, 10-year period, basically doubled water consumption. This is annual water consumption by the typical American. Doubled again in 10 years. It looked like maybe it was leveling off between 2006 and 2013. And now it just keeps going up. So we're drinking 39 or so gallons of bottled water per year for each one of us. So how did we get there? If I taught a marketing class in college, I think I would teach it on bottled water.
Let's observe the effect of Evian on your body.
Come on, I said it here. Hip hop, you don't stop the rocket to the bang bang. Boogie said up, jump the boogie, the bang bang. Boogie said up, jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie to beat.
Now what you hear is not a test. I'm rocking to the beat, and me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. See, I am Wonder Mike, and I'd like to say hello.
Here's the message.
Bang, 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 boogie to the boogie, the up jump the boogie to the bang, bang, boogie. Let's rock.
You don't stop.
Rock the rhythm that'll make your body rock. Real soon, for you heard my voice within a rock, two friends alone. And next on the mic is my man Hank. Come on, come and sing that song, that song.
So what's the message? Bottled water and stay young. That ad was so successful they did a second one. Here's number 2.
Here come the hot stepper. I'm the lyrical gangster. Big up the crew in the area. Still love you like that. No, we don't die. Yes, we multiply. Anyone press we hear the fire they sing. Act like you know we go. I know what both don't know. Touch them up and go. Here come the hot stepper. I'm the lyrical gangster. Big up the crew in the area. Still love you like that. Here come the hot stepper. I'm the lyrical gangster. Excuse me, Mr. Officer.
Isn't that fun? Beautiful marketing. Convinced us that we really ought to be drinking our water out of a bottle. Some statistics takes a lot of oil just to make the water bottles themselves. Estimated that it fuel about 1.5 million cars a year just to make the bottles. Everything is recyclable, but we aren't very good at recycling. We recycle only about 25% of those plastic water bottles. And the rest of them end up in our waterways and our landfills. This is maybe the most interesting example to me. Anyone know what's right there? That's the Fiji Islands. Okay, on the Fiji Islands, about 50% of people that live there, the natives that live there, about half of those people lack access to safe, reliable drinking water. But what's bottled there? Fiji water. Okay? And then we will ship it miles. So here's a quote from Charles Fishman. It's easier for the typical American living in Beverly Hills or Miami or Manhattan to get a drink of safe, pure, refreshing Fiji water than it is the people that live there themselves. Amazing what we do with that. This is a book just on bottled water. The author has a little bit more pointed response. He talks about suburban shoppers in America who basically take this, cases of water home, and a sad and unintentional parody of the labor of girls and women in Africa who spend countless back-breaking hours carrying containers of filthy water from distant contaminated sources to homes with no water at all. Another quote from Charles Fishman, in fact, unless you're struggling in the aftermath of national disaster, unless you live in a developing world nation without safe tap water, all bottled water really falls in that category, luxury, indulgence, or convenience. Kind of sticks it to us, doesn't it? Now, that's not quite entirely true, because we certainly do have places and times where we need bottled water. Okay, we realize that with what happened in Flint. And one of the biggest problems is that when things happen to Flint, like what happened to Flint and a few other cities, we wonder whether we can really trust our municipal water, which has a long, long history of providing safe water, highly monitored. But if we lose that trust, that's a big loss, really big loss. All right, so water is indeed perplexing. You ever been to Las Vegas in the desert? What do? The Venetian and the Bellagio, amazing. All right, given all those things, actually there's a lot of promising things happening with water. Lots of effort is going in these days to developing community and household water technology. This is probably ultimately where it really needs to be in areas that don't have access to municipal water, is ways the community can gain ownership to providing its own safe water, whether putting these filtration straws in the hands of people that lack access to clean water, putting in community wells, building inline filtration or biosand. These are all companies. Both of these, Aqua Clara is a Michigan, a Holland-based company. Sawyer actually is doing work with scientists at Calvin and Hope right now. Hope College graduate owns that company. So there are promising things happening with local technologies. Hope College has an Engineers Without Borders that's been going for several summers to Kenya to build water catchment systems and put in community wells. The key is that the community takes ownership of these. Lots and lots of charitable organizations, more and more developing. And most of them are good organizations. If you're interested in these, you should read about them. They usually have some kind of regional focus. They might have some technological focus of wells or other kinds of things, but lots of good charitable organizations. Desalination is promising from the standpoint of being able to produce clean water. It's a really, really simple concept. You got lots and lots of ocean with salt water, and basically if you take the salt water and you do a little pretreatment, you push it through reverse osmosis. Basically it's a little filter or a very tiny hole filter that doesn't let the salt pass. You push the water through, it traps the salt, and you have fresh water. You got to deal with what's left, the stuff you've taken out of the water. It's great for producing clean water. And the plants are massive, but the technology is getting better. Lots of challenges with it because it takes a whole lot of energy to do this, and there's a lot of environmental issues associated with what's left behind. And it takes money, so you have to have access to the ocean. You got to be a wealthy country, and you got to have the ability to do this. But if you can, it's a pretty unlimited source of water. This is what they're racing to do in Cape Town right now, is to get some desalination plants that will replace their water. Integrated ecological management is very promising. This notion that we really have to think about water in context of lots of other things. Water in relation to people, water in relation to food, water in relation to nature, water in relation to industry. Think about this holistically. I'll just do one example. This is the Loess Plateau in China. The Yellow River, you can see the Yellow River running right through this area that looked sort of like this about 25 years ago without all the cuts. Basically, this was an area of the country, the Yellow River runs right through it. It was heavily forested, and that stabilized the soil. The soil is very sandy. That's what the name means, is the type of soil. And once the trees were removed, it turned out to be a massive sort of ecological disaster of runoff and erosion. And so in the 90s, the Chinese government paired up with the World Bank. That's an area about the size of Texas, so it's a big area. And they're basically trying to restore healthy watersheds by taking this area that's largely lost its trees, cutting in these terraces, planting, and now it's a much more productive region, it's stable, but it takes a really holistic approach to understanding the people, the agriculture, and the terrain. Public awareness is promising. How many of you know that every March 22 is World Water Day? It's been happening since the 90s. So there is a day a year set aside to think about water. We're way behind in this country, but if you go to other countries, this is Australia, you start to see things like this. So everyone knows in Australia what a purple tap means. Purple tap in Australia means don't drink the water, but it's fine for watering. It's fine for flushing toilets. It's fine for a public water display. This is a billboard in California on a major expressway talking about water. If you want to save 1,300 gallons of water, you could not flush your toilet for 6 months, you could not take a shower for 3 months, or you could stop eating one hamburger. Trying to teach you the amount of water for just virtual water, the amount of water that goes into creating one hamburger is estimated to be 1,300 gallons. So helping us to think not only about the water that we see, but what water goes into our products. Each of these companies, and some that seem a little bit counterintuitive, Coke, the city of Las Vegas, each of these companies and municipalities are doing very creative things, either monitoring their water, conserving water, and so there's a lot of awareness out there. I suspect many of you work at companies where you pay attention to water. So indeed, there are lots of promising aspects to water. All right, that's been a quick overview trying to use these 5 words as a way to understand global water issues. It's 2 o'clock right now. I know you try to end at 2, so I'm going to leave it to an organizer if you want to just quit now or take a few public questions. What would you like to do?
I think we'll take 2 questions, and if you have to leave, you are welcome to leave. Remember to leave your name tags so that you can maybe win a gift. Any questions? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm coming.
So a conversation that some of my friends and I have, based on articles that we see and stuff, is especially in the U.S., there's this weird thing that we have about lawns and watering them. And obviously, you know, people want that acreage and they want that wealth of land that they own. Do you have thoughts on what we can do to better utilize water so we're not watering grass that isn't native and then mowing down that grass? And like, what do you see that we can do so that we still have this sort of lifestyles that we like without just this waste of lawn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably key to your question is, you know, how much do we feel like we need to keep a certain lifestyle? You can just not water your lawn. I stopped watering my lawn, and every spring it'd come up green again. And if it rains, it stays green. If it doesn't, it turns brown. If you can live with that saves water. One of the things that made Las Vegas so innovative as a city is basically they paid people to take up their lawn and replace it with coverings that didn't require water. And you can do that in your own lawn too. You can reduce the amount of things that you think need water and replace it with different kinds of plants, or pull it up and put other things in there that don't require as much water.
Thanks for paying attention and encouraging us to do the same. I am perplexed by the fact that what we wear is made in ways that make apparel manufacturing the biggest polluter of water, which that's surprising to most people, including sustainability people, as anything I've ever shared, and that the laundering of polyester clothing is the most significant source of microplastic pollution in our Great Lakes and rivers. Mm-hmm. Just curious about whether that has come up in your research and whether you see any promise for sustainability conversations and metrics to start to be inclusive.
It's so hard not to find some part of our lives that water doesn't touch. And so certainly there's this whole, what water is in the products that we wear. The reason that Levi's was listed up there is because Levi's was one of the early companies that started really tracking how much water went into making their clothes. And they would talk about it, they would let customers know. They were trying to find ways to be more water efficient. You're going to have to use some water for things, but if you can try to be more conservative, more creative in how you do product design. But yeah, I mean, what we eat and what we wear, if you wear something that is made out of cotton, sometimes it even comes from a desert that is being watered to grow the cotton to be shipped to us. And the pollution factor on top of all that, right. So the amount of fresh available water, the more we pollute, the more really is less available in a clean form as well. All right, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks so much.